to do so. Members of the council are asked to keep their microphones and cameras switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones and cameras off once they've finished speaking. To indicate a wish to speak, members should request to do so using the public chat function. I will ask members to vote for, against or abstain for each item at the end of the debate on that item, and ask that members indicate their vote using the public chat function. I will declare the result after each vote. Officers are in attendance, but will keep their cameras and microphones switched off unless called to speak. So, membership changes. John Hale and Paul Zukowski replace Nick Hollinghurst and Phil Williams on the committee. We have apologies from Simon Bloxham, Sharon Taylor and William Wyatt Lowe. So if I then move on, minutes. Can I invite everybody to confirm the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you very much. And
Agreed.
the actions, I think actions have been copied to all of you, so I hope you're all happy with that. So before item 2, I just want to say something else. COVID-19 has impacted on every item on this agenda. We've had to cancel 2 meetings of this committee in March and in June, and this meeting picks up many of the items that were deferred from those meetings. Apologies, therefore, for the long agenda, which has 456 pages. For those using the online electronic agenda, I'm going to try to give the pack page reference at appropriate places in order to try to ensure that we are all on the same page, as it were. So now we move to item 2, Audit Plan 2019-20, and we update the County Council. And an update for the County Council and for its pensions fund. And I welcome Suresh Patel, Associate Partner in EY, and I believe Natalie Clark, EY Audit Manager, might be able to join us. She does a lot of work with us as well. And maybe Nicholas Hoare, also of EY, who's also worked on our audits before. Suresh.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to members of the committee. Natalie is there. Hopefully you can see Natalie too. Nicholas won't be joining us today, so it's just myself and Natalie. So we are discussing agenda item 2, which comprises of the 2 audit plans that we issued back in early March on the County Council and the Pension Fund, which are your Appendix A and Appendix B, which starts on your agenda pack, page 15. And then you will also see, and following on from the Chair's comments about the impact of COVID on agenda items, we've then got an update paper, which is Appendix C, which reflects the impact of COVID-19 on the audit and your financial statements. What I was proposing, Chair, is that Natalie quickly runs you through the overview section of the 2 audit plans, and then I will pick up the update, which is focusing on timing of the audit, risks that are related to COVID, just an update on sort of delivery issues, and then also wrapping it up with an update on audit fees. So I'll hand over to Natalie to take you through the 2 overviews on the audit plans.
Okay, thank you for that. So moving straight into agenda pack page 19, if possible. So this sets out our overview of the 1920 audit strategy of the main county audit, and just goes through the risks that we've set out. So the first one of those is our standard management override risk in relation to misstatements due to fraud or error. As in the past, this is a standard risk that we have associated with all of our audits, just based on the nature of the environment in which you work. We have a new risk for 1920 in relation to inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. This isn't an alarming new risk, it is just due to the increasing budget pressures on the council that are in place relating to inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. This is actually a common risk across a number of councils, but just due to the size of the county, feel like it just needs that escalation this year. Pension liability valuation and PPE valuations are significant risks again this year as they have been in the past. This is generally due to the size and the high material nature of those balances, but also the estimations and judgments that sit around those. And Suresh will give a little bit more detail in his update around the impact of COVID on PPE valuations in particular for this year. Now, moving on to Agenda Pack page 20, this just sets out some of our areas of focus for the audit for this year. So as in the past, and we do every year, we reassess the group boundary assessments for the council just due to the other interests and private companies that you have, and we just reassess whether or not the council should be preparing group accounts, and have agreed for 1920 that that's not required. Earlier in the year, IFRS 16 leases was on the agenda for a disclosure to be brought into the 1920 financial statements. Due to COVID, this has been pushed back to next year, but based on the initial discussions we'd had with the council earlier in the year, they were well placed to make those disclosures, so see no issues arising for that coming next year. Financial instruments and IFRS 9. This resulted in an amendment to the accounts in last year's audit, so in 18-19. There are no changes in discussions with the council on how they're going to account for that this year based on the adjustment, so don't foresee any particular issues with that now going forwards this year. And then just a quick one on PFI. So just due to the nature of the PFI schemes that the council has, we like to review those on an annual basis to make sure there are no significant changes in relation to those and the models that sit behind those. Moving on to page 21, this just sets out our materiality levels for the audit. And this has been set at 1.8% of forecasted gross expenditure as it has been in the prior year. Our performance materiality is also set at 75%, so that's a good level to be at. So if we had any concerns about the accounts and the way that they were prepared, we would drop that level down. And as a result of COVID, we've done a reassessment across all of our bodies, and we are taking that judgment in some places, but we're not taking that position on Herts County Council because we're content that the set of accounts that you prepare shouldn't be massively impacted by COVID due to the arrangements and control procedures that you've got in place. The 1.53 million audit differences value shown there just sets out the level at which we would report back to the audit committee any errors once we come to the end of the audit. And scroll on to the next page. So just within the main county audit, just a little bit to draw attention to in relation to value for money. This is on page 29 to 31 of the pack. Just very quickly scroll down to that bit myself. We have identified one significant risk in relation to commercialisation linked to Herts Living for 1920, and we have undertaken quite a lot of this work already at the planning stage of the audit around the arrangements that have been put in place, and don't have any matters to draw to the committee at this stage. We will of course report back in more detail on this as we come to the end of the audit and report our audit results later on in the year. They're the key things that wanted to draw out in the main Herts County Council audit plan. If we then jump through the papers to page 55 of the pack, this is just going to run through the overview of the Hertfordshire Pension Fund plan. I'll just give everybody a chance to get there, including myself. Bear with me 1 second. So none of the risks in this section have changed from the prior year. We have two risks in respect of management override. One is the standard fraud risk that I've just set out in the main county council plan, and the other relates to year-end journals, specifically around investment journals, where we just have that little bit more caution around the journals that are being put in place around the year end due to the nature of the investments and transactions that are undertaken by the pension fund. There's one further risk identified, which is around the valuation of complex investments, and this is mainly around level 3 investments and has been the case for a few years now, just where we undertake some additional testing around level 3 investments where they're harder to value. And again, Suresh will just give a quick update on some of these in his report following on. Page 60 of the pack sets out our areas of focus. Again, these haven't really changed from prior years, so just a quick update that we will review the pooled arrangements which are continuing and going forwards. And then this year, in relation to IAS 19, it's been a triennial valuation year, so we do have to undertake some additional procedures in respect of that, which are well underway whilst we're now in the middle of the audit. Again, with materiality, so nothing has changed from the prior year. The pension fund materiality is set at 1% of net assets, and that's a view taken across EY, across all pension funds, both in GPS and government public sector and in corporate audits. Again, the performance materiality level is set at 75%, which again shows the good quality of working papers that we expect to be presented by yourselves. And then with the pension fund, the audit differences will be reported around 2.4 million. So that just gives you sort of a high level canter through the main risks for the audit, and I'll hand over to Suresh to talk about the update.
Thanks, Natalie. So if I take you to page 87 of your pack, you will find the update paper that we issued as a result of COVID-19. As I said before, we actually drafted the plans, I think it was end of February, ready for the 4th of March meeting. And clearly, since then, we have been reflecting on what is the impact of COVID-19 on not only the audit, but also your financial reporting. I should say that these are national issues.
So can I just stop you a second? I'm looking at pack page 84, and it's Appendix B, required communications with the audit committee. Are we looking at two different packs here?
I've got a PDF pack.
I've got a PDF pack off.
Okay, so yeah, just to be clear, so page 87 of your pack should be Appendix C and the update paper. So I was just saying that the issues that we're reflecting here are actually all national issues that have been picked up by ourselves, by SIPFA, by the NAO, and clearly we do have an impact on the audit itself. I suppose the first and probably the most important one is around the timetable. So MHCLG in light of COVID reflected on the existing reporting requirements and fortunately changed those quite significantly. So you now have up until the end of August to publish your draft accounts and the end of November to publish your audited accounts. We've had, as you'd expect, quite a lot of dialogue with the council and its finance team about the timetable that it wanted to utilise for this year's accounts. As we indicate there, I think we're expecting the draft accounts for the county council on Monday, and we've already had the pension fund accounts, and we're actually, in fact, we're in the middle of the pension fund audit. The audit of the county council is scheduled to start on Monday, which will take us through to the end of August, with a view to be able to report to you probably later in September. I think it's worthwhile saying that we have been very impressed with the ability of the finance function to continue to operate effectively in terms of preparing the accounts, and the ongoing dialogue that we've had with the council has been really useful from both sides to understand what the implications have been on both the preparation of the accounts and then the audit, and I'll come on to delivery in a second, but I have to say I've been very impressed with two or three main ones I wanted to bring out for the county council. The first one is on going concern. Now, going concern is clearly a concept that applies to all statements and all audit reports, and it's probably fair to say that in the past hasn't been an issue that auditors of local government bodies have had to consider in any great detail. But clearly, with the impact of COVID and the uncertainty that has created on future funding, then that does present both an issue for the council in terms of its own assessment and disclosure in the accounts, and then the auditor's report and what needs to be reflected on that. And I should be clear that when we are talking about going concern as a risk or an area of focus, we're not challenging whether or not the council is a going concern, because clearly it is, and there's no evidence anywhere that the government intended to change anything that the county council does. But we're more talking about the disclosures that the council should be making in respect of going concern, in particular any uncertainties around the funding that it has for the next 12 months after the date of the audit opinion, or that you actually approve the final accounts. We've had some initial discussions with the council on this. We know that you are looking at your 2021 budget and also your medium-term financial plan. That should then support a full and frank disclosure in the account, which we will then obviously be scrutinising. And as I've laid out there, areas of focus around cash flow, liquidity, and clearly assumptions that you're making about that. So that is a change from previous years, but clearly is an important change in light of the situation that we're in. Moving over to the page 88, on the top of that page, we talk about property, plant and equipment valuations. So your valuations obviously carried out by your valuer, who follows guidance by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, or RICS. RICS issued some guidance to all its valuers soon after COVID-19 hit, basically identifying a material uncertainty on valuations that have been carried out for the 31st of March 2020 in light of the COVID situation, and particularly on fair value. So where you use market data to inform a valuation, clearly that market data at the 31st of March 2020 was very volatile. So where your valuer has included that material uncertainty in their report to you, you are likely to disclose that in your accounts, which means that we were then likely to include what's called an emphasis of matter in our audit report. That's not a modification of the report. It's not a qualification. It's just emphasising to the reader of the accounts that you have a material uncertainty around the valuation of a certain part of your property portfolio, and we will be engaging our own experts to make sure that we're satisfied with the valuations that you've got. Moving on to the pension fund, which starts at the bottom of that page 88. As Natalie mentioned, we've already got a significant risk around the valuation of your what's called level 3 investments, so those more complicated to value investments. And again, we're recognising that the impact of COVID mean that there's those assets that are valued at 31st of March 2020 were valued at a point in time when there was significant volatility in the market. So we are expecting to do further work in respect to the valuation of those assets, and we go over on page 89 just to outline some of those additional procedures that we will do. There would also be a going concern assessment on the pension fund, and probably more important for the pension fund in terms of events after the reporting date. We'll expect the pension fund to take a view on the changes in asset valuations post the reporting date, if they are significant enough to warrant some kind of disclosure in the accounts. And then finally, to wrap this section up on page 90, I think it's worthwhile saying, as I mentioned before, that we've been really impressed with the finance function's ability to continue to operate effectively. From our own side, we have got the technology to be able to deliver our audit remotely. I think when this first landed back in sort of middle of March, we were a bit wary about how much of the audit we could do working remotely, but we've just been through a number of NHS and other central government audits where we've delivered the whole audit remotely. It does require a bit more thought and planning from both sides, but we've been doing that for the last few months now, so I'm very confident that we'll be able to stick to the timeline that we've got. One of the other implications on delivery is about the auditor report, where because of all the uncertainty that COVID has created, and particularly those aspects that I've mentioned before around going concern, we are going through a consultation process for all our audit reports. So when we're in a position to issue your audit report in September, that will have to go through an internal process to make sure that we are giving the right assurance to the readers of your accounts. And then finally, just on fees, So you'll have seen in the two plans that we mentioned fees, we mentioned an increase in the scale fee that we were proposing. Since those plans were issued, I've had further discussions and further proposals around the fee with the council. The council has made its views clear that, that it doesn't accept the increases that we are proposing, and the next stage of that then will be to take those fee proposals to PSAA. I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to pick out some of the compliments that I think I've heard you pay us, for which I'm very grateful. Natalie, you mentioned that you thought that our accounts would not massively be impacted by COVID for the last financial year ending end of March, due to the arrangements and the control procedures we have in place. Thank you for that comment. That's very reassuring. And you also made the comment that you expect and are obviously seeing good quality working papers from us. Again, thank you for that. And Suresh, you kindly said that you were very impressed with our staff continuing with the audit work during the difficult times, how our staff has functioned. So I am grateful to you, EY, for that, and thank you for your reassurance that you can do this remotely. But clearly there is a good working relationship between us. So thank you. Now, I've picked up various comments you've made, and I do want some reassurance on timing. We recognise that timing has obviously slipped because of the national COVID issues. I just need your assurance, please, that you have got the skills and resources to deliver this audit on time. I noted that you're starting on the 1st of June, sorry, the beginning of next week, which is good, and that you're already on our pensions one, but your assurance that you're expecting to deliver the audit on time. Early warning, please, of any additional information that you might find you need. Valuations. I think we all heard what you said on the valuation of the pensions fund and the valuation of our assets, and that you will be engaging your own experts on the valuation of our assets. Timing, I wouldn't want that to delay anything at all. Please turn the sampling that you do around as quickly as possible. That would be helpful. So we're looking, obviously, hopefully, that you can finalise the audit as soon as possible. Would you like to comment on what I've just said and give us your assurances or reassurances?
Yeah, so taking those in order that I've just noted them down. We are fully resourced to carry out your audit within the agreed timescale. I should say we are finding everywhere else that things are just taking a little bit longer, but we've kind of built that in now in terms of our resource availability. So we will be there or thereabout in terms of that timetable, but well in advance of any committee that will need to receive our final report. Yes, we will give you early warning on any additional information that we need, and that kind of reflects on the dialogue that we've already had, Chair, with the finance team around things like valuations of assets and indeed going concern assessments. In terms of use of our own specialists, we've already got the valuation specialist for your assets engaged, and they've already started, if not completed, some of that work. And yes, I think sampling. I think we've either had or due to receive your what's called analytics data, so in effect the sort of the download of all your ledger transactions, and we'll be able to start the sampling as soon as we start the audit on Monday. And again, typically your finance function is pretty good at being able to then respond to us, but obviously we'll be on top of that to make sure that gets done as quickly as possible. Did that answer all your questions, Chair?
Yes, it does. And I like the comment that you reminded us again, our finance function is pretty good. We like these comments. Right. Paul Zukowski. Paul, I think you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you. I've got, the first thing I'd like to do is just point out that actually the use of the acronym PPE in the current context is somewhat unhelpful, in that it kind of drags me away from what I should be considering to other issues that we're all aware of. So avoidance of that might have been helpful, just as a a comment from a lay person, as it were. I wanted to just ask about two things. There's a mention of risk of management fraud in both of the proposed audit plans. I wondered whether there might be a particular focus, given the internal audit report that we'll be seeing later and issues over the last few years in relation to adult care services on that context. And I just wondered whether you had any sort of comments or thoughts about particular areas where that might be a particular focus of your interest. And the final thing I wanted to just ask about, really, I suppose, is the scope of the audit, because it seems to me that what you're proposing here is very limited in terms of the scope to the financials side of audit, whereas the kind of wider risk management issues don't appear to be assessed, impartially and independently by an external organisation like yourself at all. And I just wondered whether there was any thoughts about how we might perhaps look at an external perspective on that. I know we've had peer reviews and so on from other council organisations, but I just wondered whether the scope of the audit being limited very much to financials is something that is perhaps appropriate, because there are other risks to the organisation that are interlinked with that.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thank you, Chair. I'll take those in reverse order then. So in terms of the scope, so the scope of what we do is governed by the National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice, and I think we try to refer to that in the plan. And as you say, it is largely focused on the financials, but there is an element which is around what's called the value for money conclusion, where we do take into account your arrangements, and one of those arrangements is around risk management. So we do look at your risk management arrangements, probably not in the level of detail that I suspect you're referring to, Councillor, but obviously the scope of what we do is governed by that code, and anything additional to that scope would be something that we would need to agree with you and all the associated details and fees that go with that. And I suspect you wouldn't want us to stray outside of our scope, and I particularly probably wouldn't want to do that without having that discussion. But so you can take some assurance from the value for money work around overarching general risk management arrangements. So that's the scope. In terms of the risk of fraud, so I suppose there's two angles to that. One is that again, as auditors, we have this general kind of scepticism that management is going to commit fraud. That's where we start our perspective from in terms of audit planning, and the auditing standards in effect say there's an inherent risk that management could override controls given the position they're in. So that's why we've got that risk in both the pension fund plan and the county council plan. We then think about, well, how could that manifest itself specifically to those two entities? And again, that's why in the council's plan we've got a risk around inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. In terms of specifics that might come up from internal audits, such as the adult care issues that you were talking about, we would consider that, but we consider it in terms of, is there a risk of material misstatement in the accounts as a result of that particular issue? And I'd have to look at the detail again, but that wasn't something that we've identified as a specific risk that we would want to factor into our audit approach. But clearly, if as a result of having a look at the internal audit report in detail, we evaluate that there is that risk, then we would then factor that into the plan and the approach that we would take.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. My comment is, of course, that we have a substantial item 8 on our agenda today with over 100 pages on how the County Council addresses matters of fraud, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in due course. So I'm now going to move on to Ian Ray, please. Actually,
Francis, I would like to have come back on that.
You didn't put that in your chat, I'm afraid. So if we don't operate by the chat function, it's quite difficult for chairing reports chairing items remotely, and I did ask people to make comments on the chat. At the moment, I've got a comment from Ian Ray, and then I've got one from Tim Williams. Paul, could I please ask, therefore, that Ian Ray makes his comment?
Thank you. Yes, my comment really is about the fees, because it was stated earlier, it states in the report that you've sought a 20% uprate in the fees based on the scale fee, and you've discussed that with officers and they haven't agreed it. But you don't make clear whether they've agreed a lower figure or whether they've agreed no uplift at all. And really my comment is, how is the scale fee arrived at? Is it a standard fee based on the size of business, or is it a negotiated settlement before you start the work? And why is it necessary, do you think, to review that once you actually put the process in place?
Okay. Suresh Patel.
Yeah, through you, Chair. And I don't want to go into great detail because we've had this conversation before, Chair. But so the scale fee is set by public sector audit appointments who manage the external audit contract. How they work out that fee is something that we've all been trying to work out over the last few years. Our view is that fee is no longer appropriate for the extent of work that auditors need to do to deliver a code compliance audit, and that's the reason why we are proposing an increase in that auditor fee. Officers, well, maybe officers could probably comment themselves, but I think they've agreed the current fee as it stands in terms of the one that PSA have set. But clearly, as part of this process, any additional work that we do then seek additional fees later on in the year, and we will continue to do that in light of the additional work that we've done.
And of course, if there were to be any additional work, then I would like to think that would be very clearly quantified and detailed. And similarly, you made the comment that the officers have made clear their views, that they don't accept the proposals you're putting forward on your fees. I'm not aware yet that we've got a breakdown of how EY believes those additional fees have been accrued. So I'm confident that you will be submitting that before the discussions go any further. So thank you for that. And I'm now going to move on to Tim Williams.
Thank you. I was just going to, I realise this has been discussed within the presentation by Natalie and Sir S, but I was going to actually just question again the risk of valuation of the property, plant and equipment. And if I remember correctly, this time last year, there was much discussion on this matter, much professional advice being taken, and I believe that has been resolved and it has been agreed for this year. But as we know, the valuations of property and plant and equipment is difficult to do. But yeah, how can we be confident that it will be as strong as possible? And then again, it links into the significant value for money risk as outlined on page 31 of the agenda regarding the medium-term financial strategy of 100 million in investment properties. And are these risks really covered? And then in the pension fund, of course, we've got the risks of the valuation of the unquoted complex investments also. Just wonder how we can be as strong as possible on these.
Over to Suresh Patel again, please.
Can I just clarify the question? When you say as strong as possible, do you mean that the council has valued these as strong as possible, or do you mean that our audit work on those areas is as strong as possible? I just want to be clear on what the question is, Chair. It
probably is both sides, if that's okay. The valuations that the council puts forward to yourselves and how you then come in and judge that.
Okay. Well, again, I don't know if officers want to come in after I've said something, but obviously, yeah, it's the council's responsibility to ensure that the valuations of be it property, be it investments or whatever are sufficiently appropriate, that they are then materially stated in the accounts, and tends to be obviously you engage your own expert, so either a valuer or an actuary when it comes to or a fund manager, and you have arrangements to ensure that the work that they are doing is sufficiently robust to give you that assurance. We then, in effect, kind of mirror that by engaging our own experts, because, as you say, all of these valuations are very difficult to undertake without some specialist input, which is why we engage our own valuation experts, our own actuaries, and in some cases we have got some valuation experts on hard to value investments. And so I think the combination of your own arrangements and then the work that we do in response to that, and the reporting obviously that we make on that, Is this probably as much as you can do? It's never going to be an exact. It is an estimate ultimately, and we are looking to see that those estimates land in an appropriate range. So, and I think that's as strong as you can be, because you're never going to be able to have an exact valuation on a valuation of an asset that has got judgment involved. So that's the reason why we engage our own experts.
I'm going to thank Tim very much for that question, because of course we have our own experts, external consultants, and then EY has its own experts that are effectively reviewing the advice of our own experts. And we have had discussions in the past about duplication on this. Stephen Pilsworth, I'd be very happy if you'd like to come in and comment.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, just picking up on Councillor Williams' question, you are quite right that in the last set of accounts, the council had actually changed its valuers. And the new valuers actually came up for some items that meant quite a significant change in value. So at that point, that did necessitate some additional work from EY to check those changes were appropriate. So you're right to recall there were issues last year that required additional audit work. We're now into the second year of the new valuers. And the indications are that the changes this year from valuations are much smaller than that change we had last year. So I would hope actually there's less need for audit work than there was understandably last year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that comment. So I'm now going to move on to the recommendations. And the recommendation is that we're invited to note and comment upon the EY plans for the council and the pension fund account. I think we've done that. I thank again EY for their compliments that they have paid. So now we have to work out how to agree this or otherwise. I'm hopeful that you're now all going to vote, but quite how I can organise that, I don't know. I don't think I have a voting function on here. How do we get people to vote? I'm going to ask an officer to come in and remind me to how we have to vote. Oh, we all need to do it on the chat function. I'm looking at lots of agrees. So we're voting on chat, and when we have enough, we'll get a majority. I'm obviously agreeing. I'm asking the officers if we've got enough people who have agreed. Do we have a majority there, officers? 6 agreed, 1 abstain. So thank you very much indeed. That is agreed. And we move on to item 3, which is, again on finance, an update position on the 2019-20 County Council and Pension Fund Statement of Accounts. And I think it's Scott Walker's first time to address our committee. Scott, you're welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. So quite a brief update just on our current progress producing the 1920 Statement of Accounts. As Suresh has already covered, the statutory deadlines have been pushed back because of the COVID pandemic. We could have taken until the 31st of August to complete the draft accounts. That was an additional 3 months on the normal statutory deadlines. We chose to delay our production by 1 month to try and produce them by the end of June. The accounts were signed off by Scott Cresington, our Director of Resources, yesterday, and they've been uploaded onto the website this morning. So they are now available for people to view our accounts. I think I'd just like to comment how impressed I've been with how the organisation has worked together to produce the accounts during this this period of uncertainty. I think everyone's worked together very hard to produce the accounts. So it's been a really good job, well done across the council. I'd also like to say we are working well with EY, Suresh, as previously mentioned, and we're going to be working closely together to try and complete the audit in a reasonable timescale to report back to the audit committee at, I think it's 15th of October, so we can bring back the audited accounts for approval. Other than that, I wanted to keep it brief as this is a short item, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. John Graham.
Chairman, thank you. I'm focusing on 5.4, and I think it's very polite that the finance in this paper have mentioned the collaboration. But can I just echo my own feelings that we've heard from Ernst & Young, EY, is that I think it's fantastic that we've been able to get our accounts out at this stage and all the work that's been done by finance, that in all this uncertainty, we've been able to deliver to the timetable we agreed. And I think well done to both Scots and to the finance team. And if anything, this paper that we've got in front of us, I think tends to understate the hard work that's gone into getting us to where we are now. So for me, just congratulations to the finance team.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm just now moving to the recommendations because it's a nice short item, and I think we probably just need to amend the wording in the second recommendation. The first one is to note the change in statutory deadlines and the revised timescales and the expected completion date of the external audit. The second one is to note the publication of the draft statement of accounts. It says 30th of June, so I think we need to say to note the publication of the draft statement of accounts have today been uploaded onto the County Council's website. So with that slight amendment on the date, can you all please indicate whether you agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. And we've now got our majority as the votes still come in. So thank you. And thank you, Scott, for Scott Walker for that. We have two Scots in our finance team now. So let's move to item 4, the annual governance statement for last year, 2019-20, and the Code of Corporate Governance. And I'm going to invite Chris Wood, Head of Assurance, to present his report.
Thank you, Chairman. Just let me get all the right buttons clicked so you can hear and see me. Get my notes up.
And probably we should confirm what page we're on of the agenda pack. So I'm just rolling through as well. So we're now on, I think, page 95 of the agenda pack.
That's correct, Chairman. So if I just do a brief introduction, you've got two documents in front of you as part of this agenda item. One is the annual governance statement at Appendix A and the Council's Code of Corporate Governance at Appendix B. Both have been reviewed and agreed by the Resources Management Board, the Chief Executive and the Strategic Management Board as part of the protocol and process for preparation and approval. This followed provision of service assurance statements from members of the Joint Leadership Team and liaison with Directorate Boards. I am aware that the committee briefings, or from the committee briefings, that there may be further feedback at this meeting, and the committee should be aware that EY may also have feedback during the external audit process. The annual governance statement reviews and reflects upon the Council's governance arrangements at a specific point in time. If I just scroll down, in this case at the end of 2019-20, the annual governance statement is a mandatory requirement for local government bodies set out in the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. It follows the same established format that members of the committee may be familiar with from prior years, but has been updated in line with CIPFA guidance to include a section on the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic at Section 7. Although the AGS effectively represents the position at the 31st of March 2020, just 2 weeks after the pandemic was declared, the AGS rightly takes cognizance of events after year-end and prior to its approval, and hence has referenced the COVID-19 mobilisation and recovery phases. It's fair to say, though, that 2021 AGS will have a fuller reflection on COVID-19 when published next year, and further references to the COVID-19 pandemic are also contained in sections 5.5 to 5.7 on the Head of Assurance opinion, and in section 9 on the significant governance issues, and lastly on the final page where the leader and chief executive sign the final document. So there's quite a full reference to COVID-19 in various appropriate sections. You'll note that the Head of Assurance opinion reflects an improved position on last year, with the opinion for both financial and non-financial systems being satisfactory overall. Members will recall that in 2018-19 we had limited assurance on the operation of controls under non-financial systems, so we've got an improved position there. I don't propose to dwell too long, though, on the opinion, as it forms the basis of the report at item 5 on the committee's agenda. Appendix B is the Council's Code of Corporate Governance, which sets out the standing arrangements that the Council puts in place to ensure good governance, and is structured around the 7 governance principles set out in Ifrs' corporate governance framework. The Code of Governance is made available on the Council's public website, and the annual review of the Code is being carried out by the Council's Monitoring Officer and the Head of Assurance, but has also been viewed and approved by the Resources Management Board, the Chief Executive and the Strategic Management Board. There were only a few minor updates on Appendix B, most notably around just changing the note on the corporate plan. My intention is to stop there because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm aware from the briefings prior to the committee that there was some feedback, so I'm happy to take that now.
Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, you and I have had a conversation. Thank you very much indeed for this. I'm not going to make any comments on Appendix B, the code. I appreciate it's similar, it's just been updated from previous years, so thank you for that. There was a huge rewrite on it about 2 years ago, which I think we're comfortable with at the moment. If I turn to page 107, which relates to item 6, activities involving group governance, I believe we have an adult care trading company which probably would merit reference here. I think it's called Hearts at Home. We introduced this company to ensure that we had secure continuity of delivery of care services across the county. Retrospectively, thank goodness we did. But I think that might merit inclusion under item 6. I'm going to move on now to page 118 on the agenda pack. And I'm looking at specific areas for improvement and development from 2019-20, and I would rather like to see something there on our very significant initiatives on the sustainability action plan. And I wonder whether we could have, we've got 10.1 council-wide, maybe we could have another item along the lines of, and I'm happy to take officer advice on the correct wording, we will continue to develop our sustainability action plan, which is embedded in. And I played with embedded in everything we do, and then I played with embedded in the delivery of all of our services. And I actually thought maybe embedded in everything we do is even better, because the corporate side, again, we are embedding it there too. And my third comment, if I then turn to the item where the leader of the council has to sign, the leader of the council and the chairman of the council, and that is on page 125. And it's under 10.1, and I'm looking halfway down the third paragraph, end of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 6th line. I'm being picky. I don't like the word it, because it refers to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think it's supposed to refer to the county council. The county council has delivered large-scale projects, enacted government policy. So I'm going to ask whether the it might be changed to Hertfordshire County Council. And the fact that I have 3 comments in no way detracts from the quality of the report and the work that's being done. And I'm looking to have a little look. Right, Paul Zhukovsky. Paul, a comment from you, please. And then we've got Tim. Paul first.
Thank you. I wanted to just refer the committee to the statement in, let me find the relevant point and section. It's 4.3. It's key elements of the, so the section heading key elements of the governance framework. 4.3 suggests the most recent version of the corporate plan sets out the vision for Hertfordshire, and the third one of those 4 bullets is opportunity to enjoy healthy and safe lives. It seemed to me that a statement that suggests that we're moving in the right direction in terms of achieving that particular vision is somewhat problematic in the situation we find ourselves in, particularly with the situation with COVID and especially in care homes. So I've got some reluctance to support this particular position in terms of the governance statement.
Thank you. And Tim. Tim Williams.
Thank you there, yes. I've just got a question on page 113, section 8.5, governance of county council owned trading companies. Mm-hmm. I realise that this is a matter from 1819 when it was picked up, but I appreciate an update on this to an assurance that all is going well from a governance side of these trading companies, i.e. they're being reviewed, being looked at, there's no potential conflicts of interest, etc. Just concerned that as these offshoots, they do obey the stringent governance here, as they are part of us and follow the guidelines.
I'm going to invite Chris Wood to comment, please.
Thank you for all the comments, everybody. They've all been noted. On that one specifically, I'm wondering if I draw in either Stephen Pillsworth or Scott Crudgington to perhaps comment on the Governance Council owned companies, if I might, since the responses to those and the actions to those and the updates have been provided by those officers.
And I'm going to invite them to give their correct title, because I know both of them are unbelievably senior in finance, but I know I never get the words in the right order. So Scott Crudington, would you like to remind everybody of your role here, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Scott Crudgington, Director of Resources at the Council. So also have a responsibility as the Chief Finance Officer, and the technical responsibilities relating to Section 151 of the Local Government Act that ensures the proper financial administration of the organisation. So just to pick up the councillor's question and Chris's sort of comments as well, is that we have a range of either my officers or colleague officers around the Strategic Management Board that are representative on the boards of these trading entities that the council is either set up and is either in full ownership of or in part ownership of. I seek assurances through the internal audit programme over a period of time on the governance that is in place across those entities. And in most cases, I think it's barring one of the trading entities, I'm also the council's nominated shareholder. So I step back and I have a responsibility as shareholder to these companies, and through that process I also seek assurances as shareholder and see copies of all their minutes, governance statements, etc. So just as Councillor Williams has outlined, it is my expectation that all of those companies will operate to the same stringent standards that we would operate within the County Council, as ultimately at the end of the day, this is all public funds that we're ultimately dealing with in the moment. So yes, I'm quite content. The audit programme will be reviewed, and I am looking for further transparency, whether through the appropriate committee, on the performance and operation of our trading entities over the forthcoming year. It's just one reflection just in arriving at the county council over the last year that I think we could improve in terms of that transparency and just more reporting coming through on their operations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, when we're having meetings in person, everybody has a little card in front of their name with their job title. So because this is remotely being recorded, it's just helpful if the status of the people who are attending this virtual meeting and offering their advice is recorded. So Stephen Pillsworth, for example, who commented earlier, is, I believe, if I've got the title right, is Director of Finance. So thank you, gentlemen, for your wise and considered comments. So I don't have any other. Oh yes, I do. John Hale. John.
Apologies for what might be a slightly pedantic question or comment. On section 8 of the statement, update on significant governance issues, the sentence at the top reads, the following table provides an update on the significant governance issues reported in the 2018-19 statement, and then it goes on to
page. Can you give us a page number, because there are several section 8s in different places.
Let me see if I can find it for you, Francis. Unfortunately, I'm working off the website pack, which is not the same as the I'm not going to be able to the GU software has just chucked me out. The mod.gov software has just chucked me out.
Oh. So it's tell me again which one. 8 point.
It's the annual government statement, agenda item 4A, I think. I'm just trying to bring it up. Appendix A is the actual statement that the chair is signing, that the leader of the council, the chief executive, are to sign. It's yeah. Appendix A, draft annual government statement 2019-20. I don't know, Chris, are you able to see what it is on the top?
Yes, Councillor Hale, I believe you're referring to the top of page 110 of the agenda report pack. I see it references section 9 when it should reference section 8.
Well, no, I think it's correct to reference section 9. The comment I have is it says, as some issues remain current, but the table doesn't actually tell you which items you continue to consider remain current. I've had my read through is I would have thought it should say as these issues remain current, because I'm not sure if any of them are no longer current. So can we just clarify which of the items are still current, or amend the wording to say that they are all still current?
Absolutely, I believe these would.
Sorry, a little bit pedantic, but
it's fine. Thank you, John. We're allowed to be pedantic with the audit committee. Thank you very much indeed. John, thank you for your comment. I'm looking at the notes. Right, I think we've got to the end of all of our comments. So with the comments that I have made on including a reference to our green agenda, to the Hearts at Home Limited and changing it to the County Council, are we agreed on the recommendations? Thank you very much. That is agreed. So we then move on to item 5. And let's have a few minutes just to find the relevant page. I think item 5 starts on page 139. Let's see whether it does. I suspect some of you will have got there before me, but I'm now on page 139. So we've got the annual assurance statement for 2019-20 and the internal audit annual report. And Darren Williams. Darren, you are head of shared international audit. Thank you for joining us. Please, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't propose to go through the full report, but I'll just bring to the committee's attention just the key highlights from it. So if I kind of start on page 145, which is paragraph 1.4, and that's just a paragraph in there that just reflects on COVID-19 and any impacts it had on us being able to provide an assurance opinion for the year. And we're really just confirming that because it was really later on in March, start of April, that it began to impact on perhaps our activity, that we were able to complete sufficient work to be able to provide a robust opinion. So we're satisfied that that didn't impact on our ability to provide an annual report. On page 147, which is paragraph 2.5, we've got a section on the review of effectiveness. And that is basically highlighting that on a five-yearly basis, we're required to have an external review as part of the public sector internal audit standards. That's just basically looking at how we comply with those standards. It's just to highlight to the committee really that because it would be more difficult to do a remote-based review and perhaps the value would be slightly compromised by doing that, we've agreed with the SIAS board that we're going to delay that from November this year to May 2021, just because we feel that will add more value in terms of it being a robust external review. And in accordance with the Institute of Internal Audit guidance, we are able to do that as long as we do a robust self-assessment, which is included within this report. On page 148, paragraph 212, this is where we just ask for confirmation from the head of assurance, that's Chris, and the director of resources, Scott, that there were no matters that threatened shared internal audit services independence during the year, and that the shared internal audit service was not subject to any inappropriate scope or resource limitations. Now, I don't know if that's perhaps possible for Scott and Chris just to confirm by comment that they believe that there were no matters and that there wasn't any inappropriate scope or resource limitations. Just basically because that's part of the recommendations of the paper.
So we'll pause while they come in on that, please. Scott and or Chris. Is Scott Crudgington or Chris Wood able to come in and confirm that? Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I've popped a comment in, so there's a written record in the public chat. But just to confirm, as it states in the report, that there have been no inappropriate scope or resource limitations and our independence has not been impaired.
And Scott Crudgington has confirmed exactly the same. So again, there is a written report. Nobody else has, as far as I can see, signed that they'd like to speak.
Should I? I've got a few other kind of bits just to highlight, Chair.
Then I think we'd like you to carry on through. And Tim, I've noted that you'd like to ask a question, but Tim Williams, but perhaps we'll ask Darren to carry on through first. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to page 151, which is paragraph 3.3. This is where we provide our overall opinions for the year on financial systems and non-financial systems. We've provided an opinion of satisfactory for financial systems. That's unchanged from 2018-19. Non-financial systems, as highlighted by Chris in the previous item, that's moved from limited assurance in relation to the operation of control to satisfactory. That's based on the outcomes from the work we've undertaken during the year, and also takes account of 3 follow-up audits that we've undertaken on areas that received limited assurance in 18-19, all of which have now moved to a satisfactory rating. So that's obviously positive news for the committee. On page 153, paragraph 3.15, It's just to highlight there that we provided 3 limited assurance opinions in 2019-20. It is worth highlighting that 2 of those reports are currently in draft, so they are still with management for comment. And I just wanted to highlight, just based on a comment I received during the briefing, although it's in the next report, I just wanted to highlight that there is an error in the table of completed projects in our next item, the progress report, which refers to aspects of client contribution systems in ACS as satisfactory assurance, whereas it's actually limited assurance. It is correct in the remainder of that report, but I just wanted to highlight that to avoid any confusion. On page 154, paragraph 3.20, and leading on to as well page 155, which is paragraph 4.1, we just talk about our performance during the year. It's obviously something we need to point out that COVID did have an impact on us being able to complete all the audits we had in the plan, and as a consequence it meant that we weren't able to hit our targets for the year. Really, that was a situation that was out of our control. We had expected to achieve 94% of the planned days and 91% of the planned projects had we not had to pause or defer audits. And finally, on page 158, Appendix A, it's just to highlight, really, just for information, that we've, as a difference to the previous year, we've added 2 columns to the right. One of them states the status of the audits as at the 31st of March, but because of obviously COVID caused some delays in finalising audits, completing fieldwork, we've also added an additional column to give the committee awareness of where those audits are right now. So if they've moved to final reports, draft reports, fieldwork's been finished, etc. That's all I wanted to say on this report, and invite any questions from the committee members.
Okay, I would say that final column on Appendix A, starting at page 158, updating where we are, is extremely helpful, given that inevitably some of the work had to slip towards the end of the last financial year. Now, Tim Williams wanted to speak, and I've got John Graham who wanted to speak, and then we've got several other comments. Tim Williams first.
I think it was Paul who was indicated first, but I don't know if you want to call him now or myself.
I don't mind in the slightest. I've got the order I've got is Tim, but if Paul wants to go first, that's fine.
Go for it, Paul.
Paul Zukowski.
So I wanted to just point out that the limited assurance that that was mentioned just now by Darren, it relates to charging policy within ACS. Now, one of the first pieces of casework that I was ever involved in as a county councillor was associated with deputyships and appointeeships within adult care services. And I raised this point earlier, and you know, I wanted to try and reiterate the point that I have some really significant concerns that there is issues around the financial management within adult care services as a whole. I think it's in terms of the particular issue with that we're looking at here, the SIAS report. It's not actually a criticism in any structure or any way of the internal audit system. I think the report's really good and very useful in actually flagging these issues to us as members. But I do wonder whether, as an audit committee, we ought to be directing some more significant attention in terms of internal and potentially external audit towards ACS in general, because not only is it the biggest single department in terms of spend in the county council, but it's also keeps coming back to audit committee time after time with issues relating to financial management within that section. And I do wonder whether it is time to actually pull the trigger and say we need to look at this in a much more holistic and across the board way, because it just seems to keep going wrong. I'm also aware that the deputyship and appointeeship recommendations that were supposed to be implemented by 2018 have only just been implemented earlier on this calendar year. So there are delays in delivering moderate recommendations. There's a record of issues and challenges around financial control, and we now see a limited assurance on another aspect of ACS financial management in terms of the charging policy, and I just think it's time that we looked at that a little more significantly.
And can I just check, Paul? I have apologised. I didn't spot the question at 11:01. When you came in at 11:04, that was the question to which you were referring, presumably.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I missed the first one. My apologies. Darren, are you able to reply to that, please?
Obviously, what we've identified in the following agenda item is that we're basically going to go through an exercise of relooking at the audit plan because of it's no longer deliverable in its current form. So obviously we can take those comments and consider those as we're kind of putting together a revised audit plan. We will, as part of that, be talking to all of the service boards, including ACS, so we can work with ACS to obviously put in audits that will hopefully provide the committee with assurance over financial management, and obviously the plan will be coming back to the committee in October for comment and approval. So obviously the committee's got the opportunity at that stage to see if what we've put in the revised plan is sufficient to provide the assurance thereafter.
Thank you very much. Now, Tim Williams and then John Graham.
I see that Paul would like to come back, if that's allowable, Francis.
I missed that. Yes, you can come back, of course.
Yeah, Darren, I just want to say thanks. All I will say is that clearly I do appreciate that any more broader review of ACS may take some considerable time, given the disruption that particular service has suffered in the COVID situation. So I don't think it is too unreasonable to say we should look at it, but I appreciate that the timescale might not be very quick. So just to reiterate that. Thank you.
Tim Williams at last.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. Third time lucky. Yeah, I appreciate that Chris and Scott has come back and understanding that there's sort of no limited assurances in the areas, and that's good news. And basically my question is more regarding about one of the recommendations is actually highlighting to note the increase in robustness. And I can imagine this could well be the increase in robustness that we've achieved no limited assurances. So that would be good if Darren could explain that situation. We don't often see words like increase in robustness in recommendations. So how can you convince us that we can be assured that increased robustness has occurred?
Darren.
I think that particular recommendation, page 143, I think it's on, is referring directly to the role of the audit committee in overseeing the management implementing audit recommendations. So what we're kind of reflecting on, which I think we've included within the report itself, is just reflecting on the fact that obviously the committee are closely monitoring whether management are implementing what they've agreed to implement, and obviously, as the committee will be aware, where they're not satisfied, you have taken the option up to call officers in to explain the delays or what the plans are in relation to addressing those outstanding recommendations. And I think just to clarify on the comments provided by the head of assurance and the director of resources, those were actually around any limitations on the internal audit service as opposed to limited assurance audits. They were just providing the committee really with assurance that we weren't restricted in our scope in terms of what we were looking at during the year.
Yes, it was interesting, wasn't it, that the implementing the various internal audit recommendations had become a little bit difficult. So I'm very grateful to the committee and to the officers for the work they've done on that. Tim, of course, you can come back. Tim Williams again. Just
want to pick up from down there. You've highlighted that the robustness is coming towards the audit committee, and that's a compliment, and thank you for that. But yeah, is the team in SIRS also being robust and following this up independently?
Okay, so the way we tend to approach the follow-ups, as will be included in this report, I appreciate it's going to be a bit more difficult to pick it out of the report, but where areas are considered fundamental and have received limited assurance, what normally happens is that we actually undertake a formal follow-up audit, which was the case for 3 audits from 18-19 that received limited assurance. That basically means that we're not relying on just management assurance. We are retesting areas to make sure that we're satisfied that the actions they've put in have actually resulted in the outcomes that we're looking for, or the improvements in the strength of control. So we certainly make sure that for those key areas, especially those getting limited assurance where it's appropriate, that we actually do a full follow-up audit on those.
Thank you. And now John Graham.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. I was going to raise the same point on the robustness and the efficiency, and pleased to see it. And I think the point has been well addressed. What struck me in the 3 years I've been on this committee, when we first joined, as you politely said, there are some difficulties in getting the responses addressed. We've seen that timescale come down dramatically. And I think what's also encouraging is the number of audits with limited assurance has declined. Looking at Darren, I think my memory says there were 8 last year, and I think there were 3 this year. And it's good to see that attention is being paid to the appropriate areas. So I welcome that phrase, and I think and thank you for giving credit to the audit committee for helping you achieve it.
Absolutely, I think we all enjoyed working together on that. I don't think there are any further comments. So can I then move to the recommendations that we're noting? The assurance statement and the report at Annex 1. We're noting the increased robustness and effectiveness, which we've just discussed. We're noting the results of the self-assessment required by the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards Committee. We accept the Charter 2021, so that's for this new year. And we seek management assurance that the scope and resources were not subject to inappropriate limitations, and we've had that. So could people please indicate whether they're happy for all of the recommendations? Wonderful. So we've all agreed. Thank you very much for that. But we're still talking about the shared internal audit service. We're now looking at item 6, and we're looking for the progress report. So this is for the first quarter of this year. So it's from April to the end of June, which really has been impacted by COVID, hasn't it? So back to Darren Williams, Head of Shared Internal Audit, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So following the same process, I'll just pick the key highlights out, because there are probably some important things to make the committee aware of in terms of the internal audit programme and how we're looking at that in light of COVID. So if I start on page 189, and that's paragraph 1.2, obviously the committee will be aware that they normally receive the internal audit plan for the forthcoming financial year in March to review, comment on, approve. Obviously the March committee didn't take place this year, so it was just highlighting that the plan as it currently is was approved under officer delegated powers by the Director of Resources. So we're just highlighting that, but as I've actually previously said, the plan needs to be relooked at anyway, so it will actually come back to the committee in October, and you will have the opportunity to formally approve the revised plan. On pages 192 and 193, paragraph 2.6, I just thought I'd explain this one to the committee as it's kind of specific really in terms of schools. So on an annual basis, the council is required to submit a CFO statement on the school's completion of the school's financial value standard. The way that basically works is schools are required to submit a return to the county council. That's all 387 schools, I think, maintained schools. And then we have to do a consolidated return to the DFE just to confirm that all of those returns have been received. Actually, what happened in reality this year is, as part of their information or managing information burdens review, the DFE withdrew the requirement for the authority to have to submit that return. But because I think it was around 81% of Hertfordshire schools had submitted a return internally, we have basically agreed with Children's Services that we'll continue to ask schools to submit those, primarily because they are a very useful tool for governors to self-assess the robustness of their governance and internal control arrangements. But in line with the DfE intentions, we've given schools a much longer time frame to submit those returns. So that was just to provide a clarity on that one. On page 193, paragraph 2.10, this is the really important part in terms of the review of the 2021 audit plan. Obviously, as an internal audit section, we're fully aware that we went through a planning process in December and January in order to set the 2021 audit plan. Obviously, the risk environment has completely changed from that point. So to try and run with the original plan really wouldn't be looking at the right risks anymore, wouldn't really be adding the value, and probably wouldn't help us at the end of the year in terms of providing a robust annual report. So we are currently, and it's probably also worth noting that in April and May, obviously we had difficulties mobilising audits. That was quite understandable. Officers' focus needed to be on the council's response plans. So as a result of all of that, basically, we need to revise the audit plan. We are currently working with each of the service boards in order to look at what they originally had in and what they now need in terms of key assurance projects. But equally, we've also agreed with SMB that Q1 and 2 of this financial year, some of our work will be directed towards COVID-19 assurance activities. That's very much looking at how the council has looked to obtain or looked to maintain, should I say, appropriate governance and internal control arrangements during obviously a very difficult time. And hopefully we'll acknowledge some of the really great things that the council has done as well. So I hope that that can be an outcome of the work we're going to do. The intention with that is it's going to be very contingency based, short, sharp reviews. But obviously we do want to report to the committee what we have done. So we will look to provide a summary report once that work's been completed, just to basically give the committee a summary of the work we've undertaken and what has come out of that work. And let's just see if there's anything else. I think it's also just worth highlighting to the committee, and this really is in line with a lot of the professional guidance that's out there in terms of how internal audits should respond, to this kind of disruption, is that I think the committee will need to, be aware for 2021 that the plan will need to be very dynamic. It will need to be flexible. Things are going to change, risks are going to change. And whilst we might present to you a plan in October, that doesn't mean to say necessarily that we may not need to change it again. But the key is that we're providing the right assurance at the right time. So we want to make sure that we do that. And obviously as well do enough work to support our annual assurance opinion. And the only other two bits that I wanted to highlight were on page 194 and 195. And those are paragraphs 2.16, which is high priority recommendations, and 2.21, which is medium priority recommendations. Obviously, the committee are aware that each committee cycle we undertake the follow-up process on whether management have implemented the actions they've agreed to undertake. To obviously reduce the burdens on officers, we limited that to high priority recommendations, and the details of the current updates are in Appendix B. For medium priority recommendations, as the committee didn't receive an update in March because the committee didn't take place, we provided for information the status as at March. However, I will update the committee that obviously there is a long-standing outstanding recommendation on section 151. I am pleased to be able to report to the committee that the rollout plan, which indicated that that recommendation would be completed on the 2nd of April, was achieved, and we are satisfied that that recommendation is now implemented. And that is all I wanted to say.
Well, hooray! That's going to make the table under 2.24 look much better. So well done, and thank you for confirming that the section 106 outstanding work has now been completed. Just wanted to make a couple of comments. I think the Hertfordshire County Council is always happy to support our school governors in all of the brilliant work they do, supporting the heads in the schools. So I'm sure we're all perfectly happy that you're carrying on, giving them a bit more flexibility and a bit more time. I'm very pleased that this report clearly identifies that you're picking up the internal audit items that we had hoped would be within last year's plan, but slipped just a little bit. So thank you for that. In terms of the flexibility, and it's going to be dynamic, the year, everything's going to keep changing. And I'm sure you're right. I'm sure we're going to have lots of issues coming forward with pressures from COVID-19. So certainly, I think, well, speaking for myself, I welcome the fact that there is a recognition that more flexibility than usual is going to be necessary this time. So I haven't seen anybody indicating that they want to speak. It's a straightforward report. So I'm then going to turn to the recommendations, that we note the internal audit progress report. We note the proposed approach to the in-year review and the update of the current year, 2021 internal audit plan. And we note the progress update on the implementation status. Can we all vote on that one, please? Thank you. I think we're getting quicker at voting. That's lovely. So thank you very much, Darren. So that then moves us on to item 7, which is the shared internal audit system scheme, whatever it is, SIAS, annual report for 2019-20. And this, we're back to Chris Wood, head of shared internal audit, and Darren William will help answering any questions. Chris, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. My last one. I usually write the forward to these, and next year it will be Darren's pleasure to present and write this report. I think members will remember this is more of a sort of report about SIAS itself. It's sort of almost like a corporate order, a corporate report that you might see with companies. It's distinct from the annual assurance opinion and annual report, which reports back on audit results and that kind of thing. I have found this document very rewarding, I think, because we get a lot of feedback from around the place. We have our trainees, for example, who, when they're looking to apply for it, say a job with us, and they do a little bit of research and they come across our annual report and comment very favourably on it. So it serves as a piece of very good advertising for us. It's meant to deliver a positive message about us. As ever, I probably won't say any more because I enjoy the challenge of taking questions on it. Questions can be very varied, never know where they're going to come from. So I'll open it to members to see if they have anything they wish to ask.
Well, nothing's come up yet, which usually means that it was a good read and easily followed. Tim Williams.
There we go, Chris. Yeah, it's just a question. I think it's on page, I need to get it, page 236. Just trailing down. Page 8 of your report. Bear with me, I'm still going down the page. Nearly there. Future developments. You've actually highlighted here the service has been reviewing income generation with the SIAS board and will continue to explore opportunities that complement existing SIAS skill sets and experience. SIAS are working closely with a number of academies and have developed an academy offering that continues to attract new clients in the coming years. I just wonder if you could further elaborate on this, sort of regarding the exploring the opportunities, income generation, and the academy and attracting new clients.
Thank you, Chairman. I will leave the academies bit to Darren because that's Darren's hard work, and I think he's done a great job there, so he should have the opportunity to comment on that. In terms of income opportunities, at the moment we're not set up to sort of actively market ourselves, but what we're doing is we're looking for opportunities that come along or are presented to us. So I think particularly we would look to see if there are any other local authorities within Hertfordshire initially would obviously be of interest, of which there are 3 districts and boroughs who are not part of the partnership, and for whom the original intention was that they actually be part of the Hertfordshire partnership. The other opportunities that we've looked at are town councils, for which we earn income from a limited number already. And we've been looking at opportunities, particularly with housing associations, if an opportunity had cropped up, partly because 2 of our districts and boroughs have housing stock, and so housing associations might complement the offer that we have. Again, we've tried to keep it within Hertfordshire at the moment. The appetite for the board hasn't currently been to expand beyond the borders of Hertfordshire, and also looking for partners who work, potentially having new partners who work closely with some of our existing local authority partners. So, for example, the committee may know we do the Watford Crematorium, of which Watford Three Rivers and Hertsmere councils are partners. So it's having those kind of synergies with our existing partners, that should such opportunities come up, that's what we're discussing with our board currently. If I let, through you, Chairman, if Darren could come in on the academy offering.
Darren Williams.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the academies, it's basically academies are required to, I suppose, get the same way as we are as a local authority, really get assurance over the robustness of their internal control and governance arrangements. And how that's normally done is through what they call a responsible officer. And that's one of the things that's suggested within the Academy's financial handbook. So we've been working with, I think, 2 schools or 2 academies for quite a while. And actually, it was encouraging for us that they actually suggested to 3 or 4 other academies, maybe even 5 other academies, that actually they were satisfied with the service we were providing. And as those academies were looking for someone to do that service, that they should approach us. So we, it was, I suppose, it was an endorsement of what we were doing in respect of that. Yeah, we've taken those on. They're kind of, I suppose, the balance we're trying to achieve, and it's certainly something that's come from the SIS board, is that it's good to look at small expansion opportunities, but what we don't want to do at any point is impact on the level of service we're providing to each of the partners, because that's what we're primarily there to do. So we will continue to look at opportunities in consultation with the SIS board, but we're certainly not looking to go to the route of that many other shared services have followed, where they're actively looking constantly for new clients and big clients. We want to do it in a, should we say, a stable and sustainable way. And perhaps in the future, if we want to expand further, we can look at that. But obviously our key right now, especially given the current COVID challenges, is to make sure that we can deliver what we've agreed to deliver to each of our partners.
Thank you very much. Good question, Tim. Good answers, gentlemen. With no further questions, I'm going to move to the recommendation, which is that we note the information contained in the report. So perhaps members would please vote. Thank you very much. All are agreed. So let us now move to agenda item 8, which is the County Council's anti-fraud plan for 2020-2021. We have Nick Jennings with us, the head of the Shared Anti-Fraud Service. Now, Nick, somehow we seem to have a report which is over 100 pages. I'm going to invite you to ensure that when you make any page references, you do give us the page numbers. And it's a very long pile of papers. I particularly, even as we start, I particularly say that I liked Appendix C, which was, through all of the paperwork you sent us, the report that you gave to us as the Audit Committee. Over to you.
Okay, good morning, Chair, members. And yeah, I'll start out with an apology. There has been lots going on with fraud nationally prior to COVID, and certainly in response to COVID, we've seen a large increase in the volume of fraud that we're experiencing at the moment. And we want to share that with all of our audit committees. And probably I got a little bit too excitable and I've shared too much, so I do apologise for that. Promise never to do. It is unprecedented, and fraudsters are taking advantage of that opportunity. So just as Darren's already mentioned with his report, my report's been brought forward from March this year, where this committee would normally review and comment on the council's counter-fraud arrangements for the following 12 months. However, we did agree the plan with senior officers at the time, and we will be bringing further reports to this committee later in the year, including our annual fraud report for last year and our progress with delivery of this anti-fraud plan for the current year. Just for those new members of the committee, just to give some brief background of SAFS, the Shared Anti-Fraud Service. We provide a variety of functions for the council, from helping to develop policies and processes to deter fraud, fraud awareness training for staff and members around fraud risks, the use of data and data analytics to prevent or identify fraud quickly, and public and internal communications to help prevent fraud in the first place. And finally, where our defences fail, the sexiest part, I suppose, of our service is where we conduct those fraud investigations and prosecutions, where, as I mentioned, those defences around prevention, which is our preference, have failed. We also designed this anti-fraud plan for the council each year to ensure that the council acknowledges and understands the risk of fraud and corruption it faces and has in place appropriate measures to manage and mitigate those risks as much as possible. But as I mentioned already, fraudsters are great planners, but they're also real opportunities, and they will find our weaknesses quickly. They'll exploit those with alarming speed, and if we do not have in place the robust processes and staff who are aware of our fraud risks, we are open to fraud and corruption. If I can just mention, I mean, thank you, Chair, for the comments on Appendix C. I just want to talk a little bit about COVID at the moment and our response to that. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's all in that particular appendix. But COVID has put pressure on delivery of our business as usual service. That's still under review at present, and there are certain parts of our service, such as face-to-face meetings, interviews, training, that are all suspended at present or being delivered in a slightly different way. But we did move to a completely home working service just prior to the official lockdown, but we've still been able to maintain for our partners a good response, a very flexible response, which is one of our key drivers, is that flexibility, and we've been looking at those new areas of fraud that are emerging from the COVID-19 crisis, and those in particular which are impacting not just on the county council but those other councils that we work with, because we are very much a partnership. So we've been supporting the districts with delivery of their business grants, small business grants, and the new scheme, the discretionary grant scheme, which is currently live in most of the boroughs. We're doing lots of work to support them with that, to prevent fraud at the outset, and then doing some assurance work at the back end to make sure that we're paying the right grants to the right people. We've seen a massive increase in fraud alerts. We're getting them almost on a daily basis at the moment, particularly around mandating phishing frauds. They're coming from national bodies, including the Cabinet Office, IFRS, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, CFAS, Herts Police, ALWATS. They're coming in from everywhere at the moment. And we're working really, really closely with those organisations and with trading standards as well, and community safety. We've done some great work with them, because a lot of the phishing emails that we've seen being sent out to local residents that appear to be from the council or other government bodies are really good. They're really good quality emails, whether they come into the council or going out to members of the public. And you know, we're getting some people that are falling victim to that. So we are running a campaign at the moment with trading standards to try and make the public more aware about how the council and the government will communicate with them, because COVID has seen a real change in the way that the government communicates with the public, and the same with the council as well. Our communication methods have changed significantly, and fraudsters know that, and they're picking up on that, and they're exploiting that opportunity. The National Cybersecurity Centre now have opened up a scam email system. So where we're seeing these scam emails, we're encouraging people to report them into that service. And that's been very, very effective, not only in blocking emails, taking email accounts down, but also links into websites that are being used by criminals. So that piece of work that's going on in the background is really, really helpful. But fraudsters don't stop. We've now got NHS Track and Trace. A day after Track and Trace was launched, we had a telephone call from a member of the public in Hertfordshire who'd been contacted by what they thought was Track and Trace, saying that person had been in contact with somebody with the coronavirus, and they had to purchase a testing kit for £500. Can we have your bank details, please? So, you know, they really are on the back of everything that's going on at the moment. So I just wanted to make members aware of that we are very, very responsive to the risk of fraud and corruption around the current issues on COVID. But if I can just looking at the report itself, so if my report starts at page 241, goes through to 350, and again, apologies for the volume. I'm very, very sorry, but you are only seeing the tip of the iceberg as far as fraud reports that are coming out. We've tried to keep them very, very relevant, quite short for members. If you'd like some bedtime reading that will send you to sleep, I can send you some much longer ones. So the plan itself can be found at page 277. It's item 8 on the list, and item 8C is the plan itself, and actually of most interest is actually page 283, because that's the planned counter fraud activity for the County Council for 2021. It's quite difficult to read. It's got a lot of information on a matrix document. If you've got the opportunity to expand that and have a look at it, please do so. But unlike with the audit plan, we don't intend to change our plan at present. It does allow us to be reactive and responsive to things that happen. So the things that we've outlined in the plan, activity that will be undertaken, we still see that all happening in the current year, although some of it might be pushed towards the back end. Again, I've mentioned that I think it's at page 277. When we drew up the plan for 2021, we were using the previous Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally strategy 2016-2019. We had been waiting for the strategy to be released prior to the agreement of our plan. That actually didn't come out till after the plan. You can see that item 8E of your bundle, that's page 293. And that is the new Fighting Fraud and Corruption strategy. It's supported by CIFAS, CIPFA, the LGA, Solace, and some of our external auditors as well. We're probably ahead of the game. Much the format, the area of focus in the original strategy has been brought into the new one. There's one or two tweaks around some additional principles on govern and protect, but actually we've in our plan we've got a lot of those things in place already. So we don't intend, as I mentioned already, to review our plan in light of the new strategy, but we will take it into account when we design our plan for 2021 onwards. So if I can just refer members back to page 277, where we have the plan, and just under communication, where we talk about fraud awareness of all services. What we want to do, we've seen that in the last 12 months, we've seen that we're identifying fraud in some slightly different areas. So what we want to do is a piece of work, and we've got a report going to Resources Management Board later this month, where we start to look at a fraud risk assessment in each directorate. And then right down to service level fraud risks. Some fraud risks that we have for the authority are cut across. So if it's internal fraud, staff fraud, that can cut across all services. But a lot of the fraud that we come across is very service specific. So we want to do a piece of work over the next 12 to 18 months where we really do get down into service delivery and where fraud happens within service delivery in those different directorates. And that's a big piece of work. And that's part of the culture across the organisation, understanding what the fraud risks are and what we do to manage and mitigate them. Under communication, it's brilliant. It's the most allegations of fraud that we've received from the public since 2015. So it shows that we're getting the message out to the public that they have confidence in the council to do something about fraud if they report it. But staff reporting was really, really low last year, actually the lowest since 2016. So again, a piece of work that we want to do as part of this fraud risk assessment is, again, raise awareness of what fraud looks like and how staff can report fraud if they suspect it. Just touching very briefly on collaboration, we want to do more work around use data and data analytics and fraud hubs. We are currently working with SAS Analytics, a massive analytics company on a commercial solution to help identify fraud in the procurement process through the use of artificial intelligence. So that's a huge piece of work that we're doing with them. That's been going on for about 12 months already. But when that's produced, we're hoping it will give great value for the authority. Under competence, we mentioned the government's counter-fraud profession. In fact, SAF staff very hopeful will be joining the government's counter-fraud profession as part of the Trailblazer application with a number of authorities in London and the South East. And we're hoping by the end of the year, our staff will become members of that profession. And we've also working very, very closely with colleagues in HR. We've now finalised our counter-fraud professional apprenticeship posts, and we work with HR to procure some training providers to deliver that. You made. We've had some great support as part of the ITT process from Stephen, a number of other members of PROG. So we've secured some additional funding to look at how we can deliver our service in a slightly different way, or even identify fraud in other areas such as procurement contracts, business rates, grants, council tax, those areas where we can perhaps generate some more revenue or some more savings, potentially for district councils, but actually that will lead to increased revenue for the county council as a beneficiary of sort of council tax collection. Chair, I don't want to say any more at this point. I'm quite happy to take questions from members if there are any. Otherwise, that's my report.
Thank you very much. A couple of comments. Very grateful for you. Now, there seems to be some reverberation. Has everybody got their mics off?
I'll switch mine off, Chair.
I think that seems to get better. Ian, I've spotted that you have a question, and John as well, but I'm just going to make a couple of comments. Fraud is theft. There's no question, fraud is theft. And I'm very grateful to you, Nick, for the work you do. I did spot right at the end on page 29 of the report for the new Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally, you are named and people are thanking you. So we recognise that we have a star player as a member of our staff, which is excellent. Delighted that your current plan allows us to address a lot of the COVID issues coming forward without having to alter the plan. I recognise something is going to have to be shuffled towards the end, an alteration in timing, but that flexibility is useful. I'm fascinated about the wish to start being more service specific, because it's been very clear from the comments that there are some service areas which are more vulnerable, if that's the right word, for fraud. Delighted to hear about the staff development proposals, that's good. And if you can expand and therefore increase your identification and therefore prevention of fraud, that would be a good thing. So you know I always enjoy reading your reports. So here we go, questions. Ian, I've got you first, and then John Hale, and then John Wiley. Ian first. Ian Ray.
Thank you, yes. My question is really about the COVID peak in fraud that you've reported on over the last few months. There's been a big increase in COVID-related fraud. Would you say nationally the increase has only been quite slight, but it looks to me as though there's quite a lot of extra fraud being attacking local councils in particular because of the COVID incidents like the new loans and so forth. With this peak of workload that you've experienced over the last couple of months, are you confident you've got the skills and the resources to cope with that, or are you seeing issues there that you might need to address?
Nick.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we work really closely with a number of other organisations. So we work with the National Anti-Fraud Network. We've been collecting lots of guidance from the Cabinet Office and from BEIS recently around the grant scheme. We also work with an organisation called NATIS, which is the National Intelligence Service, that provide a function for local authorities. So where we don't have the specific skills, we're able to work with those organisations and they will support it. There's very much a national approach to this. So yes, we can deal with the local issues. Where it becomes quite organised, or there's a suggestion that there are criminal gangs involved, then we can escalate that. And that's the advantage of working with organisations like CIFAS and the National Cyber Security Centre, because that enables us to disrupt fraudsters. We can take down their websites. Just going back to the start of your question, I think you're asking about the increase in volume of fraud. What fraudsters do is they look for weaknesses all the time. They're looking to exploit opportunities. COVID came along, everybody focused on what was going on with the grant scheme, with new services being delivered, with the government offering loans, and fraudsters have just moved everything towards that at the moment. Now what we're seeing is a shift back to exploiting the public and vulnerability within public. So that's why we're seeing the move to track and trace and other sort of fairly unpleasant opportunities to get money out of people quickly.
Thank you. John Hale.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether there'd been any further developments with the fraud hub involving the district councils, and my apologies if I've missed it in the hundreds or so pages of your reports, but have more councils joined since December, and is it proving useful in the COVID era?
We haven't really exploited it for COVID. That's because some of the data sets that we need to use aren't ones that we normally include in the fraud hub. But it's been a lesson for us, and we will be doing more data in the fraud hub as a result. We had started doing a piece of work with some of our partners looking at business rates. We started that work in February, so that was quite opportune, and that did give us the opportunity to review every single small business rate application that was made, or grant application that was made by a small business, and open up the opportunity for the district councils to do that as well, so they could review every single application prior to payment. As far as the fraud hub's concerned, we've got currently the county, Broxbourne, North Herts, Hertsmere involved. Luton are just about to sign. East Herts and next, they've signed the contract. We're going to start extracting data shortly, and Stevenage are our next target to get them on board. So that will give us all 7 members of the partnership within the fraud hub, which is fantastic.
Are you hoping to expand the partnership to other district councils?
We're always open to expand to other district councils. The SAFS board is very clear about that. We work with the others informally. We provide support. We've done it for St Albans. We recently helped Welling and Hatfield with a particular project as well. So we're always open to do that for any authority in the county. If people want to join, then we're open for anybody to join the partnership.
Thank you very much. I don't have anybody else who has indicated that they would like to speak on this item. So we then move to the recommendation, which is that we note the contents of the report, and a very full and interesting report it was. Can we all vote on that, please? Thank you very much indeed. So thanks, Nick, for that. So we now
Chair,
move.
Chair, can I leave the meeting? Is that okay?
Yes, of course you can.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very much. So we now move to item 9, the risk management update and the annual report. Now, this starts on page 351 of the pack, I think. So we'll just give a minute for people to scroll down to 351. We've got now Fiona Timms here. We'll see the author of the report is Peter Stanley. Fiona is definitely not Peter. Fiona Timms is the risk and insurance manager. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This again is one of the deferred reports that you mentioned in your opening. It is a report for information only, as it was prepared for the March 2020 Audit Committee. Due to the fact that resources were being diverted, obviously, to support the emergency response, we did not pursue the usual round of obtaining updates to the corporate and strategic risks. So those were suspended for the first quarter of this financial year. Needless to say, risks have continued to be managed throughout the authority, despite not having this regular chasing update to them. The Director of Resources in the Chairman's briefing earlier did confirm that he has reviewed all the major risks and is content that they are recorded here. Also, just wanted to point out that we did have a risk management audit carried out by BDO as an internal audit review back in 2018-19. If that assists members. One of the key risks that the team is supporting at the moment is the development of the risks relating to recovery, and those are sort of what we're thinking of along those lines are recorded in the report under section 11.4, which I think starts on page 362. So you can see the sort of start of the risk process that we're kicking off and looking at those key risks in terms of recovery. Turning back to the position that's outlined in this report, which was obviously clearly intended for March, you will see that we introduced 2 new risks at that time. Full details of those are attached in Appendix A on page 366, but they relate firstly to the provision of suitable in-county placements for children looked after, and then secondly to the increasing number of children with special educational needs and disabilities, and increasing costs and resources that does require from the authority. Following on from that, attached as Appendix D, which is on page 378, is the 2019-20 annual audit report on risk management, which basically summarises the changes that happened in 2019-20, showing that we did have a continual review process of risk throughout that period. Going forwards, we are commencing getting updates to the existing corporate and strategic risks, so those will be reported to you in the October Audit Committee. So basically, that's a quick run through of the key points from this report. And finally, obviously, we need to ask the committee to consider if you require a risk focus report for your Audit Committee meeting in October. Previously, there was obviously a deferred report in terms of the use or the using council assets for major developments. That report was deferred, but obviously you can either choose that report or choose another, or in fact agree to defer pending seeing the full updated risks that we present to you in October.
Okay, Fiona, thank you very much indeed. Interesting that new risks came on about children looked after and children with special educational needs. And of course, those areas are hugely pressurised at the moment as a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis. You'll know that I've suggested that we do defer the decision on the particular risk area, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I see that Paul Zukowski would like to ask a question. Paul.
Thank you. When I'm looking currently at page 354 and 355, and I raised this with officers in the briefing, but I'll raise it in the panel as well, so that there is actually a record of it. Bottom page 354, we're looking at the strategic risk descriptors. The top one on there, major developments using county council assets. The issue for me is the brief risk title doesn't actually incorporate, it is a statement rather than an expression of a risk. So if you compare it with the second and third place ones, increased uncertainty of future funding streams, that's clearly a descriptor of a risk. Whereas major developments using county council assets isn't actually a description of what the risk is. What it is just an outline of the component that you're then going to look at. I'd also say, in relation to that, that when you get to the Appendix A and you're looking at movement reports, and indeed the material above it in pages, let me just find it, it's actually Appendix C, so pages 377 and above. One of the things that's missing from those is that brief title, and actually referring between the overview risk register, the RAG rated risk component at the end of the report, and the detailed one. You have to use the specific risk code, which is actually slightly less helpful than the brief title. The brief title will actually be much more useful in terms of being able to link what you're seeing in the red, amber, green structure with the risk register summaries and so on below it. So that's my kind of question really, is can we perhaps look at how that's structured and make sure that those brief titles represent a risk and that they are replicated through the sequence of appendices. The suggestion that I had actually relates to a risk in here, and I'm just trying to identify which page it actually is linked to. It appears in a number of places, but the one I've specifically got up in front of me is 375. Okay. So the question that was posed by officers as part of the recommendation was to look at the risk register and decide and determine whether the major infrastructure delivery risk, that was clearly a very significant corporate risk, was the right thing to be looking at in the next few months. I would suggest that it probably not. But what we might want to do is, in the context of COVID, is look at the risk outlined as, let me get this right, PHD 0014 under the remit of public health. And the details of that are, in the event of a health protection emergency, for example, a communicable disease epidemic, there is a risk that the authority is not able to meet its statutory duty to be assured that relevant organisations are managing the incident appropriately to mitigate further impact of harm to the population. I'd say that might be a very sensible thing for audit, the audit committee to look at in terms of a risk, given that I suspect the risk rating on that might have changed. It may have gone down in the light of our experience, or it may have gone up, but it seems quite an interesting one to perhaps look at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. In terms of the phraseology, I'm sure our officers are always happy to try and improve the wording relating to risks and the description of them. So I'm confident, Fiona, you'll be happy to take that away and just review the wording of it.
Yes, indeed. We'll look at that and see what we can do to assist members with looking through the reports in future. May I come back on the public health risk? Mm-hmm. I did think that this may be something that members may wish to raise. So I did check the assessment of this with Jim McManus in the past couple of weeks to see that we were happy with the way that the risk is scored at the moment. He came back with the following, which I'm happy to read out to the committee if that's acceptable. He has stressed that the important word in this risk is assurance. It's not about our ability to respond and manage health protection emergencies appropriately. It's about whether we are assured that we could if it happened. The risk of not being assured is very slim because there are all sorts of mechanisms in place, hence the low risk scores, which he thinks are still correct. So just to sort of, if that assists at all, but I think they are looking to review the sort of risk entry and perhaps amend that wording slightly going forwards, but I don't know if that's helpful.
Okay, I'm just looking down. Thank you for that. I'm now going to invite John Hale to comment. John.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking about the next meeting, and my apologies if I'm saying something that runs counter to what you were going to propose, but I think it would be useful if we had something on the strategic risk covering the recovery stages and what was being done in respect to the recovery team risk development as set out in the next steps in this report. I think that given the amount of time these meetings take, I think if we could concentrate on that, that would be where I would like to see the concentration.
Nobody else has commented, so perhaps I can come back on that. I think we're all agreeing that the decision taken some time back now, that the risk we were talking about next reviewing was going to be the major developments using county council assets, risks arising from those. And I think we're all agreeing that that's probably not top of our agenda at the moment. Important, very important, although it is. So from that viewpoint, I'm very, very pleased to hear, Paul, what you've said about COVID and the risks from that, and John Hale, what you've said about the strategic risks and the recovery steps. What I'm going to propose is, because of course, in a couple of weeks' time, we've got our O&S overview and scrutiny combined with health scrutiny committee, and I understand that that is pretty much going to be looking at how we have responded to the COVID crisis to date, what the risks are in the future, relating to both the health aspect and everywhere across the county council services. Now, who is to prejudge the outcome of what will undoubtedly be a pretty lively debate? What I don't think any of us wants to do is to ask our pressurised staff who have responded magnificently, many of them doing, as I know Fiona did, coming away from her, can I call it the desk job, and during the COVID crisis, giving her time to supporting the frontline service areas, which has obviously meant the risk focus work had to take a bit of a back seat. We don't want to overcommit our staff. So when the combined overview and scrutiny and health scrutiny committee identifies where they want to go and probe further, I think it would be very, very helpful if we took our decision based on theirs. It's actually not helpful that we're effectively 2 weeks ahead of them. But I'm going to propose, and I'm using the words quite gently, so do come back, that we defer the decision on the next risk focus report until after scrutiny has determined what area they're going to focus on, because that would remove the duplication of time, and we don't want to divert officer resource unnecessarily. And then if any members of the audit committee identified a topic, the proposal could be communicated to the chairman and vice chairman, and who would then discuss it for discussion with opposition spokespersons prior to a final decision and confirmation with officers. And I very much have in mind, and I've turned the page and I've moved the page, the recovery steps that you had, because we've got the recovery team led by Daryl, and we had a schedule of recovery. Fiona, can you remind me the page, because I know you'll know the answer to this.
Yes. Let me just go back onto that.
Absolutely.
It's towards the end of the actual report, so it's in
I've found
section
it.
1.4.
I've found it. It's page 363.
Yeah, 363. Yes. So it starts on 362 and then goes through to 363. Yes.
Absolutely. And whilst that is exactly as it was when it was written, who knows what's going to emerge over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So how do members feel about deferring a decision on the next risk focus report and comments being sent through after we know the views that overview and scrutiny and health scrutiny together are going to come up with, so that we can effectively maximise the effectiveness for the county council and for the service areas? John Hale would like a comment. John, I've already done that. Sorry, I think you've already made a comment. I've reread something. Ian Ray is happy with that. Does anybody else have any comments? If there are no further... John Graham, thank you very much. If there are no further comments, and Fiona, thank you very much for the report, I'm going to turn to the recommendations. So we've got items 1 and 2, changes be noted and the update be noted, and we will not vote. Well, we're not going to confirm item 3, so perhaps within the words we could find words to say that we're going to come back to it, and we will simply vote on items 1 and 2. So voting on items 1 and 2, please. Excellent. So item 3 therefore falls. Do we need to vote on item 3 falling, or do we simply not, by not voting on it, do we not confirm it? I'm looking for officer advice on that. Does item 3 therefore? Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I wondered if we might agree to your statement as an action that we carry forward, and then potentially once the scrutiny meeting has passed, that then gives the opportunity for members to feed their topics into you as you proposed. So I think we probably need to note an action against item number 3, which is to note your proposal. I see Quentin's come in actually, so he's made a note there. If the item isn't voted on, it falls.
Gentlemen, I'm going to invite officers to do what is appropriate to make sure that we've done what I believe is the wish of the committee, which is that we have agreed items 1 and 2, and Quentin has said item 3 falls. But Chris, if you can bring this forward as an action, I'm sure you could, between you, the legal beagles can sort out a way of doing that.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes. Good. I don't think we need to vote on that from Quentin's advice. So thank you for that. I think we have agreed it, Paul. If you wanted to speak, by all means, speak.
It wasn't a particular desire to say anything about it. It was more that wouldn't it be more sensible to say the committee defers decision on the change in focus until a specific date. And if we have that as wording, we could then agree it.
So, Paul, thank you very much for that. Those were my very words when I spoke out. They should defer it. And I think Chris Wood has agreed to pick that up as an action. And we understand that, Chris, thank you for confirming that. So, Paul, thank you for your effectively verbal confirmation that you're happy that the item be deferred. So if officers are happy, then I think we move on to item 10, and I'm going to sit and look and see if any officers are concerned. Otherwise, we will move on to item 10. There's no chat, so I think we're happy with item 10, and we are going to welcome James Arundale, who, there's a good title, Lawyer Environment, Property, Lawyer, comma, Environment, Property and Dispute. Welcome, James. I think it's the first time that a lot of us have met you. Probably the first time you've done one of these for the County Council with Teams. So this is your whistleblowing annual report. And let's just check that we're all on the same page for the whistleblowing annual report.
453 as marked at the foot of the page. So my electronic version says 455 and 458 if you're using the scrolling function.
Over to you, James. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. I'm pleased to say, for everybody's benefit, this is a short report, and it is very much in the form that you will have reviewed last year. I will say very little to introduce it because I think that the meat of it all is really in section 5. If anybody has any questions about any of the earlier sections 1 to 4, in particular, obviously section 3 is recommendations, then please raise them. But otherwise, the summary is we've had 13 reports this year. That is a sort of gradual uptick in line with the gradual uptick that has been going on over the past 5 years inclusive. They range over a number of matters as set out in the report. They've been dealt with. I would say that there's no particular concern over the number of incidents that have been raised. We've been doing over the last couple of years some awareness raising internally to encourage people to report. We have the whistleblowing policy. We also have a HR focused grievance policy. We have a safeguarding policy. One thing that the nature of these reports indicates is that there seem to be overlapping now means of reporting that the council offers, which are being used.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. What a delightfully succinct and helpful introduction, and a delightfully succinct and good report. Raising awareness inevitably and properly will bring more comments, which I think is good news, in that we want a culture of complete openness and confidence amongst our staff. Do we have any questions? Now, Paul, yours is a question. Paul Zukowski, yours is a question on item 10.
Yes, and I talked to James about this in the briefing, and he assured me he was going to go away and hopefully come back with a more detailed answer than he was able to give, because it's not perhaps his direct area. And that was in relation to 5.3D, the allegation around discrimination and dismissal, which in 5.5 suggests the discrimination allegation was reviewed and found to be baseless. And I raised the question that was prompted in my mind by an employment tribunal finding where the county council had been found at fault for a discrimination case, where an investigation that was structured internally within that department was found to have not delivered the right outcome when it was looking at a discrimination issue. And James said to me during the briefing that had actually gone to Sally Hopper's unit within HR, and I just wanted to get some assurance that from HR perspective, that statement that the allegation was baseless was actually founded in reality, as it were. No, well,
yes. Also procedurally reached in an independent way, and which I think is part of the tribunal point you were making. I spoke directly to Sally. She was aware, as you indicated she might be, Paul, that of the tribunal decision that you were mentioning, and she's confirmed that it was handled at arm's length from the line management and the previous process involved in the dismissal. So yes, the review of that incident was, I'm assured, sort of independent in the right way from the initial dismissal decision.
Right. Okay. Can I just sort of bolt on to that, because I didn't actually notice at the time, but it's come to my attention since, that if you look at 5.3e, it says allegations against staff, one of which is bullying and discrimination. And I was wondering whether there'd been any, or whether you could expand really on whether there was any grounds underneath that particular, because I'm assuming that's a separate allegation.
Yes, it is. It is. I'm just trying to find my notes to deal with that one.
If you prefer, it could be taken outside the meeting, but if you've got the notes, that's fine.
Sure. Well, I suppose it's up to Paul how much he wants me to follow up after I tell him what I have in my notes. It was, again, referred through HR and through, I believe, their service desk. And what I'm told is that service desk process is effectively intrinsically a process that maintains sort of, is A, conducted at I think the right level, and B, conducted again sort of with the appropriate level of independence from the events complained of. So that's my note and my understanding from Sally on that one.
Right. I'm sorry, Paul. I'm going to go back on this because I think there are times when we don't want to push our officers to go into too much detail on a particular case. I'm looking at the headline of the brief of this item. And the headline of the brief of this item is to provide members with an overview of the disclosures made through the County Council's whistleblowing process. So my genuine instinct is, for this particular one, we've got an overview, and I wouldn't want to press our officers to give too much information on an individual one, which we can certainly pick up afterwards. There's no question at all. But this is an overview on the way whistleblowing allegations and items are addressed. So I think we need to be careful we don't go into too much detail on one particular case. Paul, you're welcome to a feedback, but then that's where we'll leave it.
Okay, so yeah, just feeding back that so long as Sally's team and HR have been involved in the process, then I'm reasonably content that actually we've done what we need to do. And I'm particularly conscious around the discrimination issue because it is a live issue nationally at the minute, isn't it? Absolutely. We do need to be making sure that we have that kind of assurance that Francis is talking about, that the process when it comes to discrimination allegations is actually as robust as it should be. And well, I think Sally's very aware that has to happen, and I'm very glad that that process seems to be working. So I've been assured, Francis.
Okay, and I suppose I'd refer you back, Paul, to the comment I made at the start, that when the whistleblowing policy itself refers to the existence of a grievance policy that deals with bullying and harassment. So effectively, you have the council has two structured lines which it makes available to employees to raise these kind of matters.
Thank you very much. And I just want to chip in that I think bullying and harassment and discrimination issues are actually top of the County Council's agenda at all times. So thank you very much. Thank you for the work you do. Now, I'm moving to the recommendation that we note the contents of this report and the ongoing work to provide assurance on the effectiveness of our whistleblowing arrangements. Can I invite members to vote on that one, please? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, James. So I'm now going to move on to item 11. And for those who not completely lost the plot, to look at the detail of item 11, you have to go right back to something like page 2 of this entire 450 plus page agenda, because we're looking at the future work programme. And we have agreed to amend it slightly. So the future work programme relates to the work that will be coming through on the 15th of October, our next meeting, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 9th bullet point on it refers to the risk focus report, which will be determined. And of course, we have deferred that. So officers, I'm sure, will find a suitable way of noting in the work programme for October how we're going to manage the risk focus report. I'm not even going to try and think of wordings. Officers will do it for us. So having asked them to amend that one, are we content with the other points for the report for the 15th of October? I'm going to invite you to, there are no comments, so I'm going to invite you to vote on that now, please. I think we've probably got a majority, even though everybody hasn't voted. Thank you very much. So that ends the meeting. I'm not even going to try and work out how many pages per minute we did. We've got through by 12:30. We didn't have a break halfway through. I hope that that was fine for everybody, including the officers who they have to sit and concentrate the whole time. I'm very, very grateful to all of them. I'm grateful to anybody who joined us from outside, and I'm grateful to all of the committee. And in terms of COVID, thank you everybody for what you are all doing in order to try and help friends, family, colleagues, professional jobs, the lot, manage and come through this this pandemic. So thank you all. Bye bye now.